part of your role in peer support is to become a workplace wellness advocate. And we do that in a couple of ways. One of the things we do is we are openly supportive of people we know to be struggling, and we kind of have to lead by example on the health and wellness front. One of the things you can also do is have an eye for policies that have outlived their usefulness but are still followed. They may have been put in place because of circumstances that made sense at the time, and all they do now is interfere with people's ability to have effective workplaces, and sometimes they just add needless stress, and sometimes there's policies where people don't even know why the policy is in place. I had a friend who was with an old big city fire department, and at 10 o'clock every night in the old station he worked at, a bell would ring. Nobody knew what the bell was for, and he actually went and did the research, and it was from 100 years ago when they used to have to put the horses down to bed at night. Like, bell's still ringing, 75 years later. Nobody knew why. There's policies like that in your workplace. So, have a thought for that as an advocate for wellness and just challenge some of that stuff. And then we also find that, your coworkers who see you leading a healthier lifestyle may ask you some questions, and the question may not be what they're asking. It might be the front question for the question they really want to ask. So be aware. That's what can start happening if you're leading by example. So here's some stuff to think about called SEEDS, the 5 seeds of maintaining and establishing increased mental and physical health. These 5 seeds that we're going to go through are all about building mind-body health. We can increase this and we can get results just by working a little harder on it. The first S in SEEDS is about the social factor. It's very important to have connection inside of our community. One of the things that we sometimes see on those TV shows where someone has an addiction problem and the family gets together and threatens to isolate them, that never works. It's the worst thing in the world for somebody to have their social support systems taken away from them. So the social aspect, the way we can sometimes become hermits, that's something that you have to be aware of when you're trying to help people. The real truth is isolation is depression's best friend. The other thing about people who are socially connected is they tend to live longer, happier lives, and are more cognitively astute because they have to have their brains switched on a little bit harder just to be around other people. As a follow-up note, the people that are isolated from society are way more inclined to get earlier onset and different types of dementia. The first E in SEEDS is for exercise and how important it is for your body to move. The body wants to break a sweat every day. You don't have to, run 10 miles, but get your body moving enough that it breaks a sweat every day. It's very, very good for your mental health. So the brain-derived neurotropic factor is the Miracle-Gro kind of sauce that occurs into our heads. This occurs when we are increasing our cardiovascular output, and it just makes people feel better. How does it make us feel better? Because it's a natural antidepressant and an anti-anxiety agent. Not to mention, you get an energy boost from getting some exercise. The second E is for education. We really want to encourage everyone, including ourselves, to look at life as a lifelong learning event. One of the things I said as a half joke when I turned 60 was that, anything I learned from now on is going to be by accident. That's not actually true. I've been still working on some stuff. And when you stop the part of your brain that's curious and inquisitive, that part of it tends to atrophy. And studies have shown that the people who continue to try to learn have way later onset of dementia and those kind of symptoms because their minds are so active. And that old term, use it or lose it, it applies to your mind as well. You can build a cognitive reserve just by using your brain. So even doing things like crossword puzzles, any of that kind of stuff that challenges the brain, challenges you to continue to learn, it's good for you. The D in SEEDS refers to diet. We all know we could eat better than we're eating, but there are some things we should simply avoid. Highly processed foods that would have lots of preservatives in them, those things are simply bad for you and very difficult to digest. A balanced diet is directly tied to positive emotions. And with the positive emotions comes a sharper sense of focus. Diet's important. And the final S is about sleep. Getting less sleep activates your stress hormones, the cortisol and adrenaline that we've talked about and will continue to talk about. Having less sleep is one of the most unhealthy things we can do. Those higher levels of cortisol are actually corrosive to the brain and causes atrophy, can cause your vascular system to become less elastic, and generally can be viewed as a toxin. More sleep is the answer to a lot of questions. So let's talk a little bit about sleep hygiene. As a peer support person, just as a person, as a family member, as anybody who wants to help others, this is one of the easiest ways we can get results for people who are really struggling. A lot of times, if people will come to you and want to talk about some kind of an issue, if you ask them fairly early in the conversation, how are you sleeping? What kind of sleep are you getting? You'll find that they're challenged or compromised there, because it's a thing that goes away. So we're going to spend a few minutes on how to get a better night's sleep, and some hygiene stuff that you can use for yourself and your others. First thing we're going to talk about is the importance of sleeping in darkness. Lots of times we have some light on, it interferes with sleep. Another thing we're going to talk about is the value of a new mattress and good clean bedding. Then we're going to talk about the inputs that we have more control over than we sometimes realize. And then we're going to talk about some of the little helpers that we can use that will help us get a better night's sleep. So a lack of sleep, as we all know, impairs our judgment and causes poor decision making. Sleep deprivation has been tied to every case of serious police misconduct around use of force. That's from Dr. David Grossman, who I encourage you to become familiar with as well. He's very highly regarded in the CIS and PTSD world in the first responder community, Dr. David Grossman. So think about that. Also remember that sleep deprivation kind of mirrors alcohol impairment. You know, if you haven't slept in 24 hours, you function like an impaired person. So, become an advocate of good sleep. We're going to talk more about the fight or flight thing, but the reality is that we have a threat assessment system that is on all the time. That threat assessment system is for our physical and our social health. We believe as humans, because of our capacity to destroy ecosystems, that we're some kind of apex predator. But in terms of the design and function of our bodies, human beings are prey animals. And the part of our brains that want to make sure we're safe is less active in the dark. It's not actually true that we're less likely to be attacked in the dark, but we seem to not have that system buzzing in our head quite so much when we're in darkness. It's kind of a throwback to caveman times. And the truth is, if you let some light into your eyelids, you don't get as good a night's sleep, because your brain won't let you get into what we call REM sleep, the rapid eye movement, which is where the restorative healing prospect of sleep occurs. We don't sleep to rest our bodies, we sleep to rest our brains and let it rebuild its pathways. So darkness is really, really important. And even, if you think you're sleeping in the dark and there's a little bit of light leaking out of the bathroom door, or there's an appliance blinking at the end of the room there, that's enough to interfere with your sleep. So we strongly encourage you to wear an eye mask if you can't get the room completely dark. And the eye masks that are molded or contoured and have little bumps in them, they don't put so much pressure on your eyes, and they really help close off the light, and you're going to sleep beautifully. You'll be amazed. If that's the one thing that you'll try, you'll find an immediate improvement as far as sleeping in that small amount of darkness. Here's another thing about the sleeping environment is many of us are sleeping on mattresses. We don't even know how old they are, but they have a service life of 7 to 10 years. Manufacturers want you to get one every 7 years, of course, but after your mattress is 10 years old, it's not giving you the support it could, and a new mattress will help you sleep really, really well. And they're on sale all the time, so best money you spend on yourself in a while. Get you a new mattress. Also, maintain clean and fresh bedding. The clean bedding helps you breathe better, it helps you sleep better, and it's just good for morale. So I'm going to talk a little bit about inputs now. We have a lot of control about what we put into our bodies and into our minds. And let's just start with what goes into our bodies. If you're eating a lot of complex carbs, especially late in the day, they're very, very difficult to digest, and they interfere with your blood sugars. If you have high blood sugar at night, you sleep very, very restlessly. So stuff like pizza or pastries at night, terrible for your sleep. And here's something that we need to talk about is caffeine. Caffeine's a marvelous product, but it has a half-life of 5 hours. So if you're still drinking caffeine at dinner time, it's going to interfere with your sleep. So bear in mind that if you reduce the caffeine in the course of the day, you'll probably sleep better. Something about caffeine that we intrinsically know is, if you're somebody who drinks 8 or 10 cups of coffee a day, or is drinking it in the evening and it doesn't have any effect on you, you're taking it to the point where it's lost its effectiveness. And a lot of times the people that decide, oh, well, I'm done drinking coffee and I'm not going to drink any tomorrow, and by 10 in the morning, they've got the skull cracking headache and the boiling guts, and they're all jittery and freaking out. That's actually withdrawal symptoms from dependency on a drug. And caffeine is in fact a drug. So it's something to bear in mind as well when we can be kind of judgy about people that are having substance or addictions issues, that those things come onto you more easily than you realize it. Nobody does it on purpose. And bear in mind that some of the stuff we're putting in ourselves can lead to dependency. So watch the caffeine. You can get an early change and a good bit of difference in your life by stopping drinking it after about 2-3 o'clock in the afternoon. And let's talk a little bit about alcohol. Okay, we sometimes think that alcohol is going to help us sleep, but it causes really, really disturbed sleep. It messes with the insulin levels and the blood sugars. Marvelous product, but it's certainly not going to help you sleep. You find that you need several drinks to get to sleep. It's probably a good idea to see somebody about that, because it's not going to work for you. And here's an input piece, as somebody with PTSD that I'm very familiar with, is if we're on a constant news loop, when the TV's on all day and all we're seeing is, death and destruction and trauma and suffering over and over and over again, and people being disappointed in their lives, it has a negative effect on you. And that sort of stuff can really impact your sleep, especially later in the day. If you're watching films or television that have a lot of violence or suffering in it, it makes you not sleep properly. And if you're someone who has any experience with demons visiting, those demons are a whole lot more welcome in your brain when you've been watching that kind of stuff. So I don't watch movies with women or children being abused. I won't watch any suffering of families later in the day. I don't watch that stuff anyway, but I deliberately avoid that kind of stuff because it makes me susceptible to a poor night's sleep. So if you want to maintain, some level of understanding of what's going on in the world, try getting an old-fashioned printed newspaper. You can read through them at your own speed, and if you're going to get your news off your laptop, you can decide which articles you're going to read and which articles you're not. It's a way better thing than having the TV in your face all day. So let's talk about a couple of helpers that we can use. And these are things that we know to work. Chamomile tea is a very soothing and resting product, and it can help you get into sleep a little bit better. Good old-fashioned melatonin, marvelous product. You have to give yourself a little bit of extra time though. So you can't take melatonin at 10 o'clock and expect to function well at 6 in the morning, because it's not going to work. It has to work its way through your system. Another thing that I use on a daily basis is a blend of Himalayan salt and local honey. Local honey, not the pasteurized kind. So, the more you maybe find at a market or a deli or something like that, that's from 50 miles away or so. The local honey has antibodies in it that helps with allergies, and when mixed with the Himalayan salt, helps your body get into REM sleep earlier. So just a little dab of that under your tongue. It's not enough to interfere with your blood sugars or anything. A little bit of that just helps you get into REM sleep earlier. I've been using it for years. It works great. And something from the old days is an old-fashioned Epsom salts bath. Epsom salts pull toxins out of your body and your bloodstream, leave you very relaxed and feeling good. Something else, we're going to talk a little bit later on about the vagus nerve, and one of the things that the vagus nerve is affected by is cold air around your head. This is part of that mammalian dive reflex that we all know something about. If you can keep some cold air buzzing around your head, you'll actually sleep better. The best way I found to keep that cooler air is to have a ceiling fan. Ceiling fans can push down on you a little bit, and that movement of air really helps you sleep. Some people like to have a little bit of white noise. They like, rainfalls or birds chirping. I'm a earplugs guy because of, the other stuff that's going on in my otherwise busy head. But white noise is something to think about. If you want to have some, it might be something that'll help you sleep. So let's talk about weighted blankets. Lots of people have had good results from weighted blankets. If you have some anxiety issues or you have trouble settling in at night, about a 10-to-1 ratio seems to be what we're hearing works, where if you're a 200-pound person, you get a 20-pound weighted blanket. It doesn't have to cover the whole bed, but it covers your body, and it gives a comfort and embrace feeling that's kind of like swaddling a baby does, and people often have good results from weighted blankets. Give them a try. So let's talk a little bit about brain science. So borrowing from our value of not diagnosing, when we talk about brain science, we have to make sure that we don't get ourselves into little rabbit hole conversations. So when we talk about the evolutionary nature of brain development, it really doesn't help to have conversations about lizard brains and mammal brain and that kind of stuff when we're talking about people in huge levels of stress. So the thing we should know is that the more evolved parts of the brain are responsible for things like executive function. That's stuff like language skills, morality, critical decision making, the stuff that we rely very heavily on, and the thing that's often the first casualty of function when we get super stressed. Another, brain conversation is this 10% of the brain thing. That turns out to be not true. Your brain's on all the time, and all parts of the brain are communicating with the rest of the parts of your brain. The older stuff with the newer stuff. It's all on and it's all talking. And we know that when stressed, that executive function part is extremely compromised. And the only part of the brain as peer folk that we really concern ourselves with is the thing called the amygdala, which lives in kind of the midbrain area. And it's a part of your brain that assesses threat and danger and helps trigger the responses of hormones that get us into the fight or flight world. So the amygdala can be hijacked through environments or through social circumstances. And the way it really works is like a smoke alarm in your brain. Okay, smoke alarms don't actually know the difference between the smell of a kitchen fire and the smell of burnt toast. And they work the same way because they're listening, they're monitoring, and away they go. So as helper people, what we're always trying to do is get stressed people back into the yellow where they're able to make decent, reliable decisions. The yellow being part of the mental health continuum, which we're going to get to in a few minutes. So something that works really well, and many of us learned it as children, was somebody would be in a hyper agitated state or maybe even hyperventilating or having a nervous cough or something, and some nice, invariably older person would say, "Here, have a drink of water." And the person's all, and have a drink of water, and they settle right down. Why is that? It's fascinating. We used to think that it was part of that caveman thing that I talked about a few minutes ago, where we think when we're safe in the dark, but where you're safe at the watering hole to expose yourself by bending over and drinking. And anyway, what we found out is that swallowing function is all part of a vagus nerve reset, and the vagus nerve is on the outside of your spinal system and meanders through your head, down through the back of your throat, down your back. And it's fascinating for what we're doing as peer folks. But the thing with the vagus nerve is that as it goes through the back of your throat, you can get it to reset and calm yourself right down. When you do breathing exercises, those are actually vagus nerve resets. And that's something that we want to know a whole lot more about as a peer person. Here's an interesting vagus nerve thing that you can do right now. Is you lace your fingers together and then put them behind your head like this. And hold your head still and just look to the 3 o'clock position. Over here. There, and I just did it. And what will happen is if you hold that position, you don't got to bend your head, just look over in that position. And your body will either swallow, or it will cough, or you'll let out a sigh. And interestingly enough, you feel better right afterwards because that has reset that vagus nerve. I find it fascinating stuff. This is why you always feel better after a laugh, because that vibrates the back of your throat. That's why people feel better after a cry. It's also something that, humming and singing makes you feel better. So vagus nerve stuff, we're going to spend some time on it with some videos and some other conversations, but I really encourage you to get familiarity with it and do some of those tricks on yourself. And any of the stuff that we're showing you here, you can teach to others. There's nothing proprietary about it. Go ahead, teach people that. Another thing that we find is really good is good old-fashioned walk therapy. Walk therapy can be really, really effective, and we kind of have two choices when we're dealing with people who are struggling. We can take them or maintain them in a low emotional threshold space, and the other thing we can do is get them out of the space. So if you're going to get them out of somewhere, it's great to go for a walk. And if you're walking with somebody, you walk beside them so they're peripherally aware of your presence. But as we're walking forward outside, the human body was designed to walk distances every day. And as you're experiencing visual inputs and sound inputs, you can be a little bit distracted by that and be more truthful and forthcoming in your conversation. And people who are walking and talking usually get a whole lot of good work done in that short period of time. It's kind of what eye movement therapy is about as well. Is it kind of distracts the brain a little bit and lets you be a little more truthful. So think about that. While we're on the subject, though, when we talked earlier on about boundaries, think about as an organization and as your own self, what about boundaries? If somebody calls you in an agitated state, would you meet them in a park? Maybe. Would you meet them at a coffee shop? Probably. Would you meet them in a bar? Probably not. Would you go to their house? Almost certainly not. Would you have them come to your house? Almost certainly not. So The low emotional threshold space is something that we're always trying to ensure. And in my experience as a peer support guy, I could when I had a traumatized or injured crew, I had a couple of choices. I could take them to a community center because I could use a community center space in municipal, or I could go to a coffee shop parking lot and do a tailgate and have a visit there, or we could do what we were going to do in the firehouse. And invariably, they always felt safest in the firehouse, and as do I to this day. I feel safe in the firehouse. It's interesting because the firehouse is invariably the jumping off point in career departments, at least, for all kinds of bad craziness that happens afterwards and all that trauma you're exposed to. But we don't make the connection that the firehouse isn't a safe space, even though it's a launching spot for all kinds of trauma. So it's an interesting thing. So the safe space thing, it's really pretty much up to your clients. Let them decide where they want to be, and as long as it's physically safe for you, that's where you kind of want to go. So now is a good time to look at the mental health continuum.